Good morning, PFI Nation. I am Jacqueline Venner-Sensky, the Horticulture Coordinator with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we are here today with Paul Rasch at Wilson's Orchard down at Solon, right outside Iowa City, Iowa. Paul is going to be talking to us today about, there's just some of his crew coming back. Paul is going to be talking to us today about how they do apple harvest here at Wilson's Orchard, and we're going to talk about some post-harvest handling, and we're going to go over to the
Cider Barn.
The Cider Barn, and we're going to be doing some talking about how the pressing process works over there, and we have all kinds of exciting stuff to talk about. So Paul Rasch is someone who brings a lot of experience. He has an illustrious background in apples and apple production, and I'm going to let him, I'm not going to waste any time, I'm going to let Paul start talking about apples. So Paul, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, no worries. Great to be with PFI, one of our favorite groups, to be sure. So today I think what we're going to try and do is go over a little bit about how we do it. Now everybody's operation is different. I grew up in the sort of commercial apple industry, and it's appropriately called an industry there in Michigan. So what we do is kind of based on what works there. Our operation is roughly 45 acres of apples right now, maybe getting on 50. And we find what we do pretty appropriate for that. But you know, not everything that we're going to show you today is going to work for everybody. The one thing that will work it, and I think we should start there, is really when do you pick apples, because you know there's a lot of misinformation or lack of information out there about apple picking. So I want to just start there. And if I look, so these are Lucky Johns. It's a hilltop variety, a strain of Jonathan's. We're just coming into picking. Today's our first day of picking these. And so what we're looking at when we look at apples is never the side facing the sun. We're always looking at the side that isn't facing the sun, and in particular at what we call this background color. So this is fairly green, but on a red apple it tends to go from a green to a greenish white to a whitish yellow to a pretty solid yellow. By the time it goes to yellow, that apple is, generally speaking, at full maturity, maybe full maturity plus. It's going to taste probably great, but it may be starting to get softer than your customers want, depending, especially if it's a retail customer, they want, you know, stuff that you can break your teeth on. So they're not going to want anything soft. So that's what we go primarily looking at. The other thing that you can do, and of course every apple farmer should have a knife, but you can look at seed color, and that's a somewhat reasonable indicator. You know, these seeds are brown going to black. If they were white, obviously that's going to be an immature fruit. The problem is that some varieties are going to get black quicker than others, and even strains of varieties seem to do that. So it's not the best indicator. The real best indicators are background color, and then you can do a starch iodine test, okay? I mean, if you want to go all nerdy and lab, so you can get some iodine solution, and you can do that, and there's generally sort of templates that'll say, for Jonathan, this is when you should be picking, when the starch, because that shows you when the starch in the apple has converted largely to sugar, okay? But honest to God, the best indicator of all is just to eat. You know, I mean, look at that's what we do. We look at background color and we chomp into it, you know. So if I'm eating this apple, it's a Jonathan. So right up front there's some tartness, which is, I love. But in the background, I can taste a little bit of starchiness in that. It's not fully ripe, but I know Jonathan's to be an apple that wants to go a little soft. And at this stage, the seeds in this apple are producing ethylene. which means that off the tree, that apple is going to continue to ripen. So I'm not at all worried about picking these right now. If I wanted the absolute best tasting apple, I would come back in probably, well, with the weather we're getting, probably 3 to 4 days and pick them. So what we're doing today is we're picking enough to sort of wet the whistle of the market. We will be making successive pickings of Jonathans in the next week, probably every couple of days. The strain of Jonathans that we're picking also dictates when we pick them. So we have 2 primary strains. We have Ruby Johns, which is a really early Jonathan. It gets almost burgundy to almost black colored. This is Ruby John, which, as you can see, gets a nice red color, but picks a little bit later than a Ruby John. And then,
can you say that one more time? What's this variety?
This is Lucky John.
Lucky John.
I'm sorry, not Ruby John. Yeah, what did I say? Well, anyway, you'll have to do a lot of editing on your own. But yeah, this is Lucky John. This is from Hilltop, and it's a good variety. I wouldn't say it's as good as, I think there's Chrysalis Jonathan out of the Peters Orchard down in Missouri, and I think that has a lot more potential. But this is a good one. It's just a question of how they size. Jonathan is a little bit challenged on size most years. This year they don't tend to be. So we're looking at, for whatever reason this year, despite the heat, which usually inhibits coloring for us, we seem to have really good coloring and really good size. As you can see on these Jonathans, there's not a lot of small fruit on them. So, yeah.
So are you, let's zoom out and talk a little bit about this whole orchard area here. It of course is apple season, apple harvest season. So you got to start with how you know when they're ripe. But in this orchard here, this is your production orchard, right? You said this is about 20 acres. Can you talk about like what you do with the apples from this orchard, how many varieties you have represented here, and that kind of information?
Sure. So, yeah, this is about half of our apple acreage. We have about, I think, 22 acres here right now. About 5 of that is dedicated specifically to cider, hard cider production. So what we do with this orchard, and this is also an orchard, when I got back into the orchard business after some time away, the world had moved on into dwarf trees, and to be honest, we kind of screwed up a lot of the plantings in this first block, where we are. So there's some questions about rootstock and stuff that we can talk about. But essentially, this is our commercial orchard where we produce for sale to grocery stores, essentially sale or sort of supply into our farm market for people that don't want to go out and pick their own at the other orchard. Supply to universities, school districts, stuff like that. And then a goodly supply of cider for sweet and hard cider. That's the purpose of this orchard. We have, I'm guessing, around 30 varieties here, but some of those are not in great numbers. So we've been messing around with hard cider varieties for quite some years, and we have probably getting on, it's probably more than 30, because we probably have 15 to 20 cider apple varieties here, and then another pretty solid 20 varieties of dessert apples, not specifically for hard cider. Over there I'm looking at a row of golden russet. That's an apple that carves both ways. You know, you can use it for sweet cider, or you can use it for hard cider. It's a really good keeping apple. It's a russeted apple, so that tends to be a long keeper. But the bulk of this orchard is dessert apples. It's Jonathan and Liberty and Wine Crisp and Crimson Crisp and Gold Rush and Macintosh and Galas and Jonna Gold and such. What is that? So
very good.
Maybe we can go up and just see these guys.
See what they're up to.
Yep.
So the other thing to talk about is this is a high density orchard.
Yep.
And you have the trellises.
Yep. So, all of this is dwarf stock, dwarfing root stock. all sort of M9 size by and large. We used a lot of Bud 9 in this orchard, which was, I think, a fundamental mistake because we just don't get the growth out of them that we should. And they're very unforgiving with any kind of water issues. And we've had some, because this was a cornfield, it had quite a plow pan in it. We've had some drainage issues, and Bud 9 just cannot handle that. So I guess we'll go down here. So picking labor is always a big issue. We use H2A labor. Our guys are from the Ukraine. They are a fantastic group of people, not just because they work hard, but because they're just great people. They have very Midwestern sensibilities. They happen to speak really good English, which is great because my Ukrainian sucks. And so, yeah, they're what drives our picking. We have, so this is a Kubota narrow tractor. It's a 4-wheel drive tractor that we use, and that's important because we can narrow it down to 54. We can actually narrow it down to 4 feet wide, which gets through a modern high-density orchard. And then this thing behind it is made by Phil Brown, and anybody that wants to be in the commercial orchard business needs to know Phil Brown Welding up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Sparta. Maybe it's Conklin, I guess, mailing address. But this thing will, so we pick into 20 bushel bins. This machine will take 5 bins at a time, and it lowers down and it just basically sucks them up. And then you pick into it, you can lower it down. You can see it's really easy to get up and down on here. And then you can raise it back up to transport them. To discharge the apples, we'll just roll them off the back on these chains. And Bob's your uncle. That's it.
Very good. And you were saying before, when I first came up here, you were showing me how you have your sort of lift picker, and then you have your ground crew.
Yep.
And there's a, can you kind of talk through that process? Because you were saying one of the most important things, of course, is you don't want to get bruised fruit. And so the actual handling process is significant.
So, yeah, and you can watch these guys as they empty. They're very careful. These picking baskets are padded on the inside.
Like that?
Yeah. And then they discharge out the bottom, so you're basically making contact with the fruit. And that minimizes the picking. And most of these guys are really good, except Ura. He bruises a lot of fruit.
Yeah.
He's
very bad boss.
Yeah. So this is Ura, Misha, Andrei, and Kyle. And on the brownie, which we'll take a look at, that's Ivan. So these guys will pick up to, head height, basically. And Ivan will come along with the brownie. A brownie is a 3-wheel drive hydraulic platform that we can raise up and down. We use it for pruning the tops of trees. We use it for tying wires to the top of trees, and we use it for picking. And pruning, yeah. And pruning. When these guys are actually pruning, yeah. So, yeah, that's about it. You can see that the key thing here is, if you look behind here, you see almost no waste on the ground. So we estimate that we lose between 2% and 3% to the ground overall when we pick. But at the other orchard where it's you pick, that number can go to 40%, 50%. On some varieties, it might even be 60% that fall on the ground. And that's because people don't know how to pick, number one. Number two, they're picking something, or they're letting their kids pick something, and they're saying, I don't want that, that's thrown on the ground. Or they're letting their kid crawl up the tree, or shake the tree, or they're playing, softball with apples or whatever, I mean, the you-pick thing is not for the weak of heart, okay? I just tell you, you can lose a lot of fruit, especially fruit that are really susceptible to dropping. Okay, like galas, they, you got to rip them off the tree almost, but, Honeycrisp, Macintosh, Song of September, those things, you look at them too hard, they're going to fall off the tree. So, yeah, that's it. That's I'm trying to take my picture. All right, so we can just look at what Yvonne is doing here quick to get the tops.
And he's a little ways behind them, but it seems like for the most part, the majority of the production, I mean, they're getting most of that from round picking.
Yeah, they get, especially on these trees. So that's a different variety of Jonathan on a different rootstock. That's Geneva 11. Those are about 3 years older than these, but you can see the difference. That Geneva 11 for us has been a great rootstock. These are on bud 9, and they just can't seem to muster the energy to make a big enough tree, and that is true basically across our orchards. I know out west they love bud 9, and parts of Michigan they love bud 9, but it's not for us. But you can see Yvonne, he can go up and down, in and out, and what he's got up there is a modified picking bucket that can actually hold up to 4 bushel of apples without putting extra strain on them, and that is because it's compartmentalized. Again, this is all made by Phil Brown.
Okay.
And then when he's full, he can just swing it over and drop it into one of these boxes. So that's a really interesting thing, and if anybody's interested, you can go on Phil Brown's website and look at some of the new cool stuff coming down the road, which is happens to be my brother who's part of that, and Phil Brown. But they have this DBR harvester, which actually takes apples from up high, and instead of putting them into a picking basket, it sucks them into a vacuum tube and then deposits them into the box. It's cooler, and it's not far. I mean, they're being sold right now, and it will, with labor and stuff, become part of the future for apple picking. There's no question about that.
Very cool, very cool. I do have a question in the chat, and it's a pronunciation question.
Yeah.
Is it Gala, Gala, or Gala?
So it depends on, I say Gala because that's what, that apple's out of the New Zealand breeding program. They say Gala.
Fair enough.
I say Gala because it makes me sound knowledgeable, and you got to work it, but most Americans call it Gala. Yeah.
It's good. It's good. So that one came out of New Zealand.
Yep. And there's a lot of that's the other thing, that is a question, is how, what we're planting, what varieties we're looking at, what rootstocks and stuff like that. On the rootstock thing, you got to know your soil and have some experience. Like I say, the Geneva rootstock are really interesting because they are disease resistant, very fire blight resistant. And as interesting to us anymore is they tend to be selecting for replant resistance. So if you replant an orchard, it means you can go right back on the same ground and plant again without fumigation, which used to be the norm.
When you're talking about variety selection for growers of your scale or smaller, which would represent most of the growers in the state of Iowa, would you say it is more important to consider the apple variety, the rootstock variety, or like the sort of like how do you rate those in terms of like selection?
Well, so let's just look at Aronia berries, okay, as an example. Aronia is super easy to grow. Every grower of Aronia has a good time growing it, and nobody wants to buy it. There's apple varieties very similar to that, okay? They're, Ida Red is an example. Annual cropper, big fruit, colors well. There's not much of a market for Ida Red, okay? On the other side of the spectrum is Honeycrisp. Every grower hates to grow it. It gets diseases just looking at it. Every insect loves it. They fall off the tree, they overcrop, they biannual bearing, blah, blah, blah. but consumers want it. So that is, for us, first and foremost, we're looking at what do consumers want. And consumers want two things right now. They want good flavor and crunchiness. My dad may be the only human in the last decade that like mushy apples, okay? There are not
I love
many
a Golden
people.
Delicious, and they're pretty
there we
mushy,
go.
but
But there are not a lot of people that don't want a crunchy apple. And
Yeah.
Honeycrisp really revealed the extent of that preference, consumer preference, because it's the first apple that combined real juiciness with crunchiness, right? So if we're looking at varieties, we say, what do consumers want? And paramount in our mind is flavor. It's got to be able to be crunchy, but you know, for us, crunchiness is a little bit of a relative term, because almost any apple right off the tree, I mean, Jonathan is not a crunchy apple, but picked right now, it's nice and firm. It's very satisfying, and it has great flavor. So if we were a Washington apple grower growing, you know, 1,000 acres of, which is not a large orchard anymore in Washington, we wouldn't consider something like a Jonathan that can't ship to Iowa and still stay firm with no refrigeration once it's in the store, you know? Even with Smart Fresh and a lot of other growth regulators and stuff, there's limits to what you can do with an apple and crunchiness. But for us, we're really looking primarily at the consumers and what they want, which we believe is flavor. So we're not going to plant any apple that either doesn't have great flavor right off the tree or doesn't make some other great use for us. Could be sweet cider, could be hard cider, or something like that. And then when you look at that and say, okay, well, what do consumers want? They want great flavor and they want something that's crunchy. What are your options? Well, it used to be in the days of old, not so long ago, 20 years maybe, you had a wide variety of stuff that you could buy from commercial nurseries, because nurseries would graft out a lot of different varieties basically on speculation, assuming that somebody would buy them. They ended up burning a lot of trees, to be honest, and because they got it wrong. You know, it takes about 3 years for them to grow out a nice tree. And you know, in 3 years the world can have changed, or a new variety came on board, or whatever. And so what the industry has gone to now is, by and large, well, a couple things happened, but the big thing that happened is we went from planting, you know, when I was a kid, 100 to 180 apple trees per acre to 1,000, 2,000, sometimes more than 2,000 per acre. So the demand for the number of trees just skyrocketed, which meant all the nurseries were doing all they could. They had, you know, it was a seller's market. You know, the buyers could not get enough trees for years and years, and it's still that way. So the industry has moved into contract growing. If you want apple trees from me, you give me money up front, I'm gonna graft them this year, I'm gonna grow it out next year, and I'll get you the tree the year after. Right? And that's basically what most of the industry has gone to. And because that's dominated by the big growers, that has narrowed the number of trees available from good commercial nurseries from about, you know, maybe 50 varieties down to maybe 10 varieties by and large. I mean, there's more than that, but by and large, you know, you're talking Galas and Fujis and some Golden Delicious and Honeycrisp and stuff like that. But you're also faced with the fact that all of the breeding work that's being done around the world, with few exceptions, is being done for large-scale commercial growers, and is being done with an eye towards patented varieties, which are unavailable to smaller growers. So Cosmic Crisp, perfect example, developed by Washington State University, and despite the fact that it was developed using state tax money, it is now the exclusive domain of Washington growers. Other growers can't grow it without the permission of the marketing group that controls that variety. And the idea is to limit the number of of trees of that variety that are grown, because farmers around the world, I've learned, it doesn't matter what you're growing. If you see your neighbor making a lot of money growing pigs, you're gonna get into the pig business. And if they're growing peaches, you're gonna get into the peach business. Then pretty soon you have an oversupply and the price crashes and blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to limit that by limiting the supply of trees. So, long story short, what you end up with is just a undersupply of varieties that are outside of that maybe 10 main varieties, right? So for growers like us, what we want is stuff that tastes better and is more interesting to consumers than what they're getting in the local grocery store. And that starts to get us into weird territory, right? I mean, varieties that nobody's heard of, like Crimson Crisp or Snow Sweet, or even some old varieties like McIntosh and Jonathan's, you know, which are great tasting apples, but they will not stand on a unrefrigerated shelf in a Hy-Vee store here and be, you know, good for any length of time. They're just going to melt in people's mouths, and then you get complaints.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing. So when we're looking at varieties, we're looking at what do consumers want, and then we're trying to figure out where do we get those varieties. And more, we're looking to the scab immune, the disease resistant plant, you know, back in the 60s, started taking Malus floribunda crabapple that was immune to a lot of diseases and crossing it with commercial varieties, primarily McIntosh at that time. And eventually that program grew out into some really good varieties like Gold Rush and Crimson Crisp, Liberty, Wine Crisp, and we just love those apples. Not just because they don't require the same spray regime, but also because on their own they're great apples. Gold Rush is absolutely one of our favorites because it's a great apple for cider, as well as it stores a long time,
Yeah.
And it's just got remarkable flavor that changes, as most winter apples do, after a while. You know, so we really like Gold Rush. The other breeding program that we're quite interested in is MAI, the Midwest Apple Improvement Association. And that is a bunch of crazy Midwestern, mostly Ohio and Indiana guys that decided, they just never got the memo that, you know, apple breeding should be left to the experts. And they started just doing pollination. And basically their idea was, let's breed apples that work for small scale, direct to consumer, by and large, Midwestern farms. You know, what does that mean? It means we got to have great flavor. The basis of their program back in the early days was Honeycrisp, because they said this is the first really great apple that consumers have overwhelmingly pushed into the market. Commercial growers wanted nothing to do with Honeycrisp. Looked ugly, hard to grow, but consumers just demanded it, and it really, that apple grew out of U-Pick and retail orchard operations. That's the basis of a lot of their work. So they've crossed.
Hey, Paul, while we're talking, let's walk over and see if we can get a look at that picking machine.
Yeah.
And you keep going about how they MAI and they cross
So the basic part of their deal was Honeycrisp, and then they crossed it with Gold Rush, they've crossed it with Sweet 16, they've crossed it with Fuji. Their cross with Fuji resulted in a really fantastic variety called Evercrisp, which, if you haven't tried it, is just a phenomenally good apple.
Okay.
Yep. And so the beauty of MAI is it's open to everybody.
Yeah.
You have to join their operation. It costs you $100 a year, but it's the best $100 you'll ever spend.
Aside from, of course, a membership to PFI.
Yes.
In addition. Hey, one more question here while we're standing here. There's a question about, I think it's Macoun, M-A-C-O-U-N. Does that grow well here?
No. I mean, you can grow the tree. Our experience with Macoun is somewhat, so we
just... You want to swing around and show the machine there, Emma? There, he's just going to empty his apples.
Empty.
Can you, let's go ahead and take a look up there. Go on, keep talking, Paul. That bag holds up to 4 bushels, and they're like divided into compartments.
Yep, it looks like it's. Yep. So he's got to get it down fairly close to the base.
Yeah, and he's real gentle there how he does that. Gorgeous. There they go.
Yep.
He fills the
so
bag.
that's what those various rivet places are for, grommets are for. And he can control, he's got a set of forks on the
Yep.
brownie. So this is quite a versatile machine. It can go in and out, sideways, up and down. Phil also makes, Mike Malik has one of his picking platforms, which are more, you know, you can put 4 to 6 guys on them and go up and down. And now a lot of the picking platforms are actually self-driven as well, self-driving, so you don't have to pay attention to the driving part of it. Yeah, but McCowan, we got this.
Why don't we, can we start heading
Yep.
toward the
Yep.
shed?
So McCowan, that's a good question. It's you know, it's well known to a lot of eastern U.S. and if I remember right, it's based on Ben Davis crossed with McIntosh. Ben Davis was an interesting apple that was basically like a red Rome, or maybe it's a red delicious. It was one of these apples that stored well and looked good and didn't have any flavor to it. And McCowan actually has really nice flavor. The problem we have with it, and it could possibly be that we have it on M7 rootstock, which is, you know, it's kind of like a weed. It wants to grow a lot of tree and not a lot of fruit.
Oh, sure.
And so McCowan for us is it produces fruit, tastes pretty good, just doesn't produce much fruit for us. We never seem to have much of a crop of McCowan. We have probably, I don't know, 60 trees or so, and they're just forever a disappointment. But it's not to say on a dwarfing rootstock, in a better site, it wouldn't do well, I don't know.
Okay.
McIntosh does well for us. It's a cold, hardy variety, and we like that. So, you know, maybe McCowan could work, but compared to McIntosh for us, it's just a no-brainer. There's a lot more production.
So as we head over toward the shed,
Yep.
we've seen how the picking happens. We have our ground crew, we have your brownie crew, so to
Yep.
speak, up on your lift. And they take a lot of care, and so, and it seems like this is a crew you've worked with, you know, over years, over
Yep.
some time, and they're really good at their job and well trained and so forth. But what happens next? So they pick out here, they have
Yep,
these big
they pick
crates
out
on
here.
the forks.
They pick in what we call bulk boxes.
Uh-huh.
Usually they're roughly 20 bushel. You can see those are plywood boxes, so those came out of Washington one way or another. A lot of those boxes came in 2012 when the Midwest didn't have a crop and a lot of apples were being shipped from Washington to here. But anyways, regardless of the type of box, that's what we pick into. We go into our sorting, we go into what we call the beverage barn or the cider barn, and that is where we store apples. We have 2 big cold rooms there and a third one for cider. We have a small grading line which basically sizes the apples. It washes them and sizes them. So we wash, sort, and size, and then we pack them into, you know, if it's the schools and they want 125 count smaller apples, we'll make those up special. If it's for a retail account that wants big apples, then that's what we do. The other thing that happens there is we make sweet cider, and we have a belt press, an 18-inch Frontier belt press. Makes something in the order of a couple hundred gallons an hour if we really got, you know, good apples. And that cider is then either jugged, pasteurized and jugged as sweet cider, or it is fermented and making people happy as hard cider.
Awesome. Awesome.
And this, just by the way, so on the question of varieties, like I said, we work with MAIA a lot. This is Rosalie. That's one of the newer varieties that we got. And that's an interesting one from MAIA. A lot of these are, so these trees, we've started grafting our own trees. These are bench grafts done in the winter. And we do that primarily because we can't seem to get good quality trees. Mm-hmm. We can buy trees. You know, you can get Rosalie and stuff like that out of nurseries on the East Coast, but if you want some of the lesser known varieties, you pretty much got to graft them yourself, or risk, you know, paying 15 to 20 bucks for a tree that's 2.5 feet tall and, you know, 3/8 diameter or something. That's just going to not grow very well.
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier, about how frustrating that is, that things have gone that way, that you just can't get those anymore. So you get the rootstock. Say again where you got the rootstock, and then where do you get the scion? Like where do you get the variety?
So we get, rootstock are easy to get. You can get them from all sorts of places on the West Coast.
Okay.
And those, you know, you can pick and choose. You just choose what diameter you want. And then you've got, for scion, pretty much we get them from our own orchard, you know. We will, if it's a MAI, you have to pay them a certain amount, $1 I think, for grafting the tree, or it's $1 a year, I forget, but there's a fee schedule that you gotta attend to. But other than that, yeah, we get the scion from our own trees and graft it onto rootstock, generally from the West Coast.
Okay, great.
We good?
All right.
All right, so I can show you quick. So this is one of our cold storage rooms. So apples will generally come into here. We won't generally refrigerate them. Well, it just depends on the variety, but so they'll be in these bulk boxes here, and eventually they'll get packed. Like here's Gala for the schools, Gala for the stores, Honeycrisp for the stores. This is Song of September, packaged for sale at our retail market.
What you all viewers unfortunately cannot experience right now is this delicious sweet apple smell that hits you when that cooler door opens.
This is the best smell of fall.
It truly is. Like one of those sweet, I don't even want to say it smells like a candle. This is what a candle wants to smell like, right? Like this is the real deal. It's, oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is fruit before grading, after grading, and then anything that doesn't make the cut for this ends up as a cider apple, and then we'll go look at our cider production.
I see you have some canned hard cider here stored.
Yep, so we produce a number of different ciders. That one is Goldfinch, based on Gold Rush as an apple. I told you we liked Gold Rush.
Yep.
And then we've got a blueberry cider. There's a Honeycrisp cider that we use Honeycrisp in. We make a cherry one, a peach one, a pear one, you name it, we're making it, seems like.
Okay, so these apples.
So these are Galas. So these will be sorted for the schools. So they're a smaller apple. They want, you know, just a smaller single-use apple that they don't have to mess with. They don't have to cut it up. Gala's a good choice. That stays firm. It's nice and sweet. Kids love it, and that's what we're doing.
Those are
so
great.
We can go down here. It's going to get a little noisy when we get towards the cider making, but you'll get an idea what we do. So these are Jonathan's, and they're going to go through this little rinser, up the elevator, and then the elevator is going to drop them into the chopper, and then they're going to come out of here as chopped fruit, and you can see how they're getting sandwiched between two belts, top belt, lower belt, juice falling down here. The juice goes through this filter, and you can see it coming out there. And the smell here just like Jacqueline was talking about. So for sweet cider, we're looking for sweet, tart, and aroma. And right now, the aroma in this spot is just almost intoxicating. Now, out of the back end of the press, you can see, I'll come over here. So this is the pumice coming out of the back end. I'm going to try and squeeze this. We shouldn't be able to get any juice out of that, regardless how hard you squeeze. So that's about 75% of the juice has been out of that. We feed this to sheep and cattle. We raise sheep on this stuff. So that juice is ending up, it's ending up in a tote here. That tote will go in to the cooler, get cooled off, and then we'll jug it. And we can see them, I think they're jugging over here. About ready to roll? Yeah. All right, let's do it. All right, so we're just starting a jugging run. It's an old milk filler. This is Pedro Aguilar. He's been with us a long time. He's the man on the filler. And you can just see it just kind of slowly popping up. It's a gravity filler. And so this juice has been run through a pasteurizer. It's a plate and frame pasteurizer.
All right.
With 2 boilers attached to it. And it's temperature controlled. Yeah.
Fantastic. Hey, there was a question back by the cooler. Do those coolers control ethylene levels?
No.
They do not.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So this is your sweet cider.
Yeah, just 1 second. I just gotta.
You bet. So we have all these gallons of sweet cider coming through, and it looks like it washes them off then as they go through after they get lidded and sealed after they fill.
Better, yeah.
And then they come through and are rinsed off so they're nice and clean. And then they come over here and get packed into crates. And it seems like we have 1, 2, 3 guys running the line here, maybe?
It should be 2. 2,
okay.
Yep.
Oh, yep. Gotcha. All right, and how many gallons of cider will you produce a day?
Somewhere 600 to 1,000, depends on what we're doing and how ambitious we are.
You bet, you bet. All right, well.
All right, so then we can look just briefly at the hard cider side of the business. So we would take those, totes of cider and put them into our fermenters. So these are big stainless steel tanks, which will control the fermentation in a sanitary manner.
And how many gallons did you say those totes are, Paul?
Those are, we use 330 gallon totes.
330 gallons, okay.
Yep.
Oh, and then here we are.
And so here we are with our fermenters.
You bet.
So these are basically 2,000 gallons a shot, and they're jacketed so we can control the temperature. This one is interesting because this is a trial. This is a very high temperature fermentation, very unusually. Normally we would keep that fermentation quite cool.
It's very warm.
Yeah, but that temperature right now is 101 degrees.
All right.
Yeah. So this is going to ferment very, very quickly. It's just a trial that we're doing. But normally we would ferment at relatively much, much lower temperatures in the 60s to low 70s is how we would do that.
Very cool.
And then we have a canning line over there, and that's basically where we, so we're either then, with the fermented product, we're either putting it into cans or putting it into kegs.
Okay.
The keg market is coming back a little bit, but it has been relatively package intensive, which is kind of bad for us because cans aren't as good a profit as, as kegs. So we also pasteurize our products. So these have been pasteurized and are now being labeled. That's what these guys are doing right now.
Okay.
This is our peach product.
Oh, I see. And then there's the labeler.
Yep. The labeler's right over here. So you'll see it. It's going to put.
Oh, that's kind of fun. All right, so we'll get that shot, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up because we are right up past our 11:15 time. But I think we're going to do a little extra bonus footage. But I just want to say thank you so much, Paul. This has been amazing to go from the orchard to the pressing and all the way through to this point. This is a really fun process to see, and you're so knowledgeable. So thank you so much.
That, but it's great, and thanks to PFI for doing this because, I think everybody tuned in and now and later will agree that PFI is just the greatest thing since sliced bread. Maybe better than sliced bread. I don't know. I mean, we're in the anti-carb world. So.
It's a new tagline. Better than sliced bread, right?
Indeed.
Better than, almost as good as cider.
Yes.
All right.
That's a stretch. But
Well, thanks so much. I do need to, I was remiss earlier in not recognizing the crew that's helping out with our Live from the Farm. This is our final Live from the Farm for the season, and I have to say thank you very much to Emma Little, my partner in crime here behind the camera, and to Jason Tiedrich, who is back in the office helping us with our tech support. So thanks very much to both of you. Thanks to everybody for tuning in for this season of Live from the Farm. So long from the farm.